Hi there, I'm April Paige, breaking down the what, when, where, and how creatives get their inspiration. I'm a big fan of the cursey words, and I've been a creative for 30 plus years in marketing and fine art. This is where creatives unite to break down the facts of creative life. Buckle up, let's get lost in the world of creativity together. Hey everyone, welcome to Artists Antics with April, where we talk to creatives about creativity. And I'm very excited to sit down with filmmaker and environmentalist who, in my humble opinion, succeeded in capturing some story of the environment. I welcome filmmaker Will Freund. Welcome.
Hey, how's it going? Great to be here.
Yes, thanks for being on one of my initial casts, and I'm very much appreciative of that. And shout out to your dad for referring you to my channel. You know, my talk with him was amazing, and I'm sure this one's going to be just as amazing, but thank you for that. To
Yeah,
Chip.
sure.
So a little bit about your background so everybody knows, you know, kind of the setup of the story. I can't wait to dive into some of my questions, but you're a storyteller with a passion for education and environment, and you're an environmental educator and filmmaker with almost a decade of experience. Your passion is to lower the threshold to entry for all creative and educative endeavors while addressing the climate crisis. And aside from that, you work full time at UNC Chapel Hill, near me, Moorhead Planetarium and Science Center, where you're on a team that produces the statewide North Carolina Science Festival. And then you're also president-elect on the board of directors for Environmental Educators of North Carolina. Did I get all that correct?
I think you got everything.
Okay, good. Um, so I would like to start our conversation because I'm a very curious person. How did you fall in love with filmmaking? What got you started? You know, what was the spark?
So when it comes to filmmaking, it really starts with other mediums before filmmaking. Filmmaking is kind of the most recent medium that I've taken, but it really started with photography. Photography was really where I got a love for creating media, creating art, which really that all started with a love for exploring nature. And, that's something that I've had the opportunity and privilege to have those experiences from a really young age. And I, you know, if you listen to the episode with my dad, Chip Freund, you'll hear a lot of his stories with his photography. And the apple has not fallen very far from that tree. And I kind of picked the photography bug from him, being out on family trips and seeing him take photos. And I really thought that was interesting and fun. And so I got my own camera in college, and then kind of did more photography over the years. And then also was working as an environmental educator and wildlife educator, and was realizing that filmmaking and storytelling is kind of the merger of, kind of visual media like photography, and, kind of audio storytelling like education. And so that's kind of what brought those two together.
That's amazing. Yeah, we talked on your dad's interview about exposing, you know, kids, how important it is to expose kids to your passion so that they pick up on it. And you're a clear example of that. So, and start to pay the creative spark forward. So that's awesome. Not many people have that experience in their family, so I'm envious, and I think that's wonderful. So, you know, is it because of your dad that you choose the environment? Because he's more nature and the nature of things in the natural world. I guess my question is, you know, you have chosen the environment as kind of your call to action, you know, for what you want to see happen in the future. And I'm just curious as if it was because you were in nature that you picked that up, or how did that happen? Like, what made you become an environmentalist?
So I think the stages of becoming an environmentalist is multi-stage, and I've really been thinking about this, and who knows what it'll turn into eventually. But I've really kind of thought a lot about of how does one become an environmentalist, and it starts with having access to nature. Whatever that is, whether it's your backyard, whether it's a community park, whether it's a national park, the beach, whatever it is, it starts with just connecting with nature. And I think a lot of that started with, having access through family trips and having my family provide those opportunities. But kind of where I started to take it a step further was, going to school for biology and kind of really learning the science, and kind of diving into the research, and then even more so after college, doing all sorts of different research. Particularly, most of my career has been spent working in coastal communities, whether that's, with the Moat Marine Laboratory and Aquarium in Sarasota,
Mm,
Florida, or
yeah,
the Bald Head
from
Island
Sarasota.
Conservancy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the Bald Head Island Conservancy, off the coast of Wilmington, North Carolina, even all the way up to or down to Tybee Island off the coast of Georgia. And so, island communities I've found a love and a passion for, but also there are some of the ones that feel the earliest signs of an impending altered climate. And
Right.
so, working those communities and also talking with the people in those communities and teaching the kids in those communities is kind of really what kind of spurred me on to being an environmentalist.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I love the water. It's close to my heart because I grew up in Sarasota and we went to Moat Marine quite often, and it's always an education there to be had about how everything affects everything in the wildlife area there and in the seashore. So that's awesome. I know I watched your piece connected by water, and I had a couple of comments there and some questions for you. So, it goes and tells the story about climate change from, to me, the macro to the micro. You did a very good job of getting that across visually, I think. It's a journey that you took. For anybody who doesn't know, he took a journey on the East Coast of the United States, to visit all the coastal communities and find out what they thought of, what's happening in the climate, and find out their opinions and talk to them about it. So it was correct me if I'm wrong, Will, it was 1,000 miles and a 16-foot sailing kayak, which hats off to you for that. And
Yep. Oh
my
yeah.
first question is, how long did that take?
So I have two answers for that. The first answer is 3.5 months. It was about 100 days. Um, the second half of that question is a year and a half. And the second half of that is I first started that trip in March of 2020, which is what we all know is right when things started to lock down for the pandemic. I'd made it 2 weeks from Miami, Florida to Cape Canaveral, and basically was forced to get off the water due to things shutting down. And then it was not until April of 2021 that I then resumed the trip, which then finished right before 4th of July.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, um, I wanted to hear, on those trips and of all the people that you talked to, what were some of the key takeaways that you got from speaking to them about what they thought about climate change?
Yeah, it was really enlightening for me in having a lot of these conversations. The film itself has, 8 or 9 stories, but, really I have, dozens that I could talk about. And, there's probably 2 dozen that I filmed. So these are just the ones that made it into the film. But really, some of the things that were, I think, worth noting is that most of the time when we were talking about climate change in the film was usually at least the second half of our actual conversation. And really trying to make people feel comfortable in those situations, because climate change is a loaded topic, for really anyone. um but even with that, I rarely tried to call climate change by name, as much as possible, because of it being such, those two words are so loaded. And so it's, really having more conversations about, people's connection to the environment, people's connection to the world around them, how they feel about, the changes that they're seeing or not seeing, Um, and really what it came down to is that climate change is not a black and white issue, which we're continuing to see more and more people are kind of in that it's not a black and white issue, but that it's various shades of gray. That, people are almost everyone knows about climate change now and, are, understanding that it is impacting the earth in some way. Um, but at its core, everyone that I talked to, no matter where they stood politically, or emotionally or socioeconomically, was that they cared about the environment and around them, and they cared about leaving their communities, their local area better for their children and their grandchildren. And that they're doing what they think is best. And it's that real connection to family and to community. And it just comes down to then I think the biggest differences was how do we go about it?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a big question
Yeah.
from the macro to micro level, like individual to government and corporate. How do we start to turn that boat around? I think, a lot of people, or at least I'd love to get your opinion on this, saw, that when COVID did happen and everything shut down, that a lot of the sanctuaries and the sea life and things were coming back into life, and the pollution was clearing up on its own, et cetera, because of the fact that we weren't operating anymore. And I just found that very interesting. And if nobody believed it before that, I would think that would be proof.
Yeah, I think this kind of gets at a couple of different things. Um, One is that this actually gave researchers an incredible opportunity, that we had not had this low level of emissions as a society, since before the Industrial Revolution.
Wow.
It's been, and so with that, that is gave us a really interesting insight that if we just took, 50% of our cars, 80% of our cars off the streets, what would happen? We ran that experiment, and
Yep.
so we could see that. Um, but also at the same time, climate change and kind of what we were seeing um throughout the pandemic from an environmental front was a lot of localized impacts. There was a big thing of like the dolphins came back to Venice,
Yeah.
was one, or the smog over LA cleared.
Yep.
And there was a lot of those like local environmental things, which is really important, and it is a larger part to of the larger climate change story. But where things get, to kind of take it that next step from that local environment to a global environment is really hard. Um, to kind of wrap your head around the fact that we as a singular species, or me as an individual human, has impacted an entire planet, is really hard. And also can feel, one, scary, and two, really guilty.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
it's really easy just to ignore those feelings. And so, we've made progress on that, but I think, it opened up a lot of conversations, but I think it also, um, I think started to potentially pose more questions than people were willing to answer.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. And I think, we all have to band together to want to do it, I think is really another thing that, to your point, we have to get to. It's like as individuals, even if we're doing the best we can for our footprint, so to speak, that if not everybody's doing it along with us, then, it's only going to help, a fraction. It'll help, don't get me wrong, but it's every little bit helps. But I think that, talking about how do we make bigger change is really important. I think that's through, you know, groups and governments and, people banding together to try to really make some kind of real change. So, yeah, no, that was great and very interesting. And That kind of leads me into the next project that you had, the Blue Glacier Then and Now, the challenge project for the climate change. So how did that come about? I know I heard from your dad in general, about how that came about for him, but I wanted to get your perspective and what was it like on the site and, sharing that experience with your dad, just in general. What are your thoughts there?
For sure. It was really interesting for me, and a very different experience from my dad, uh, since he had been there before. He had seen the Blue Glacier, and he had that previous relationship and that kind of placeholder in time of what it looked like back then. For me, I had seen those pictures growing up, but had never made that kind of emotional connection like he had. For me, going to the Blue Glacier, going to Olympic National Park was an incredible opportunity, an incredible experience. The Hoh River rainforest is gorgeous. Um, but when we first started talking about this project, I was coming off the heels of Connected by Water. I had finished majority of the editing for it. And I was, not necessarily looking for another project, but I was kind of excited about it because I had learned so much about through Connected by Water as a kind of a self-made, self-filmed of myself film. Um, I was hungry to kind of push, my skills to the next level. Um, and when we were starting to talk about this project, kind of the end of 2021 into 2022, um, it it absolutely sparked me in a lot of ways, and it was a really interesting opportunity for me as a creative to kind of learn about how to turn the camera around and tell someone else's story.
Mm,
Because I think that I learned a lot about how to tell a story of myself through Connected by Water, and I'd done a little bit of like some interviews here and there, but of other people. But there's a significant leap from just doing one-off interviews to like embedding yourself with someone. Um, and for me, it was a known person, a family member, but it was a pretty significant style difference and frame shift as a filmmaker from thinking about how I'm going to record myself day to day to recording someone else.
yep.
And so, being able to, know my dad as kind of the main character also meant that I was able to kind of anticipate a lot of things. Just knowing him as a character and knowing him as family, that oh, if he starts talking this way, oh, okay, here, let me
Yeah.
pull out the camera and start recording.
He's about to
Um,
tell a story. Yeah.
yeah, but he was also really great to me that he would come up to me at points and being like, "Hey, I got something I want to say."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Great, here, let me pull out the camera."
Yeah.
And so like it was very much like it was a two-way creative
That's awesome.
opportunity
Yeah.
for us, which was incredible. And to kind of get to the kind of emotional side of it for me is also the kind of impacts of climate change on the Blue Glacier was like it was two parted of like we got up to the glacier, which was like super exciting, but then also like seeing where it was at was also devastating. So it was this like huge roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah.
um but
Yeah.
it was an incredible trip.
Yeah, no, he explained his emotions as well and how when he first saw it, that he got really emotional about, the change and what's been happening. And it's just a clear sign of what's happening to the earth, what we're doing to it. And but what a great combination of you being able to have those memories with your dad and working on a project like that. I know I've done some things with my grandmother before she passed, and they really mean a lot to me. And not only that, but you're actually trying to affect what's happening. So it's a, win-win situation. Actually triple win because you're showing off your filmmaking skills as well. So, and this might be in left field, but how does being in astronomy at the planetarium affect your work at all? Does it have any effect on what you're doing? And just curious if
Yeah.
that crosses over in any way. And it's okay if it doesn't. I just thought I'd ask the question.
So, yes and no. So at Moorhead Planetarium, we are Moorhead Planetarium and Science Center. My work tends to lead into the and Science Center part. But we do astronomy work. We uh have to constantly, look at the differentiation between astrology and astronomy.
Yeah.
And um, in terms of filmmaking work, not really a ton other than, learning how to talk with people, storytelling. I mean, what is education other than storytelling, and what is science other than the story of how things work?
Yeah.
Um, and so like I see a lot of elements there. I mean, the kind of like most direct parallel between like my filmmaking skills and my work is we do educational videos for our educators for some of our programs every year, and I'm the director for those videos.
Yeah, no, that's
Which is super fun to, kind of keeps my skills up a little bit here and there. And I know my team is very appreciative of that, of like, here we have a filmmaker on our
great.
team. But
Yeah.
it's fun.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, speaking of being a director and a filmmaker, your style, I just want to talk about that because, I watched those videos and you did everything from Under the Boat, which, I really just want to give you a shout out for that because however you did it, I just thought it showed like the monotony of the trip, and the little flappers going back and forth and the people that you interviewed, those were very telling stories and I don't know how you prompted them, but um how did you get to the style that you have now? And the way I look at it is, for me watching it in my from my view, and you might have a different view of what your style is, but from my view, it was, really trying to show what was going on, but also tell the story and show the environment at the same time. So it was kind of weaved in together very well, I felt, not just about, your trip, but the people you met, the environment and the animals there. So yeah, I just wanted to hear like how you got to that style.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. In terms of style, I mean, I think a lot of it comes from the media I've been consuming throughout my life, and really the kind of last 10 years, I have really immersed myself in a lot of the filmmakers on YouTube these days. Particularly those that do, kind of adventure filmmaking. And in a lot of the kind of adventure vlogs. I think those were kind of a lot of my initial inspiration when it comes to filmmaking. Some of the initial, kind of inspirations that come to mind for me is someone by the name of Levi Allen, who is an adventure filmmaker based out of just east of Vancouver, BC. But that or a Bo Miles, who's based out of Australia, that I really try and lean into authenticity, and also genuine interest and enjoyment. And when kind of prompting those kinds of questions to get those responses, is asking honest questions, and leaving space for unanticipated answers.
Mm.
And more than anything is just listening. I think as a filmmaker, one of the most important things we can do is shut up and listen. Is that we're, especially when it comes to documentary filmmaking, is that, we are not trying to force a story.
Right.
That, if we hear something going in a direction, is to pull that thread and follow it. And those will usually be a lot better story. And there's a couple of those kinds of things throughout the film, still trying to keep things in the kind of like environmental realm. Um, but, follow people what they're interested in and kind of see what we can learn from them.
Yeah, no, it's a great reminder and a tip for really anything about listening. Not just filmmaking, but in general, when you're listening to the people around you, or even at work, or in groups that you're in, or in doing your art. Um, I experienced that in my own art. I have a direction that I think I'm going with my paintings, and then I think, okay, I'm going this way. And then if you're not paying attention, if you're doing that active listening in a way, you're being observant. If you're not paying attention on what's actually happening, you might miss the magic. So
Yeah.
if you force it too much, then yeah, it never ends up good. So great point, and thank you for that. So um in the in your process, from like conception to final cut, like are the general, you don't have to go into every detail, but what's the general process from conception to final cut?
So that's very much an evolving thing right now, particularly, when it comes to filmmaking, because the first thing I'm going to say is I am not a trained filmmaker. My degree is in biology. I have a minor in sustainability. And like, yes, I technically, as of Monday, will be an official grad student, but I'm not, I'm going to be going back to school for sustainability and environment, so not any more filmmaking. And so in
Yeah.
terms of my process, it's very much still evolving because when I made my first film, Connected by Water, I had no process other than the logistical side of like, how was I going to get from point to point?
Yep.
Where was I sleeping? Where was I going to get my food? What is the route that I was going to take? Those were the things that I was focused on. The kind of creative process side of things, most of it was me just watching other documentaries that and kind of also with watching those documentaries, kind of paying attention to what I paid attention to. In that, you know, I would watch a film and I would then self-reflect, like, you know, did I like it? What did I not like about it? How to make me feel. Um, and that kind of then might inform what other kind of documentaries I would find. If I find a director that I liked, it's like, oh, okay, maybe I'll go and, see what other kind of stuff they did. Because I recognize the fact that I've created two films. And so like, I have a long way to go in terms of creating my process. That's kind of where I'm at with my process right now is, it starts with trying to figure out what what is the question I'm trying to answer? What is the story I'm trying to follow?
Mm.
Who are the and really, I am continuing to also think about, you know, who is the main character and what are they trying to accomplish? And doing a lot of the kind of pre-production in terms of thinking, reading, talking, um, ahead of time. And then as we get into the actual process, using some kind of storyboard, kind of document or software, maybe it's Milanote, maybe it's, a PowerPoint, Evernote, whatever it might be, of just like sketching out like theme ideas, potentially like taking screenshots from films that I think could kind of potentially fit the vibe, maybe making a Spotify playlist for the soundtrack. Um, and then the shooting itself is shooting, trying to get the story that I can in not using not trying to get 100 hours of footage. And then editing is very much still kind of a learning process as I go. But I am an Adobe editor.
Very good. Yeah, no, that's great. I just came across Milanote, by the way, so I'm very excited about that software.
Yeah, it's great.
Um, so yeah, no, that's great. And it reminds me, since I'm a senior marketer in my day job, it reminds me of, what we do when we're trying to advertise or market. We have to think of the concept and the question we're trying to answer, and who is going to be the main, character, and, who are we trying to address, and then all of the rest of it comes from that. And if you have kind of a loose outline, I think it's probably better than having a really strict one, or at least being flexible in your direction, because then as you're in the field, you find something find some gem or piece of gold somewhere unexpectedly, and you can run with that. So
Yeah. I would
yeah,
say like when the kind of next phase, because the one thing I'll say well, with my two current films have been completely, self-fundraised and funded. Um, I was able to get fiscally sponsored for my first project, so I was able to like get some donations for it, which was immensely helpful. Could not have done that project without it. But the kind of to take things to the next level as I continue down my filmmaking career is starting to look at larger grants, and potentially some like filmmaking fellowships that have kind of money aside, looking at them. And way a lot of those kind of grants come from in the filmmaking world is you have to kind of go out and shoot a little bit to kind of get the idea of it, kind of a mini trailer that you can then go and pitch to production studios,
yeah.
and to funders. And so that's kind of how I'm starting to think about my future films is like, how do I try and find some stories to tell and kind of get enough to get a pitch deck together that I can then
Right.
go to funders.
Got it. No, that's really important. It kind of goes into my next question, which is what do you give as advice? Like if you have three things to say to a new filmmaker, we kind of touched on a lot of it already. So, I get that. But if you have three things to say to them, what would it be? Like in any realm.
Oh man, I mean, I very much still look at myself as a new filmmaker, but if someone hasn't made any films, I mean, the advice I would say is like find, I say don't not make a film just because you don't have the right equipment. I think that's a first place to start. I mean, our smartphones you can film a whole documentary on, or film or creative, fiction film, whatever you want.
Yep.
The other, I will say from a documentary side is, you know, find find the question that you're trying to answer,
Mhm.
and let that be your driving force. Because you know, s- it's something I really taken to heart as I look for my next film and kind of looking back is that if you don't have that guiding question, it's really hard to kind of give yourself a direction to go in. So then you just start to film everything and then you get into the edit suite and you're like, where is this going?
Yeah.
Um, and so, finding that question, finding that central character, whether it's you, whether it's someone else, whether it's, an idea, find the question that you're trying to answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for that. And my last question, where would you like to see filmmaking go in the future? Now, I know you're fairly new at this, but whether it's technology or subject or, whatever it is, where would you like to see that go?
I'll say from a technological standpoint, I think we're in an incredible place. I don't think we need to necessarily improve a lot more. I think that the cost of filmmaking has come down substantially in the last
Mhm.
20 years. And so the threshold to entry technologically and financially is dropped a lot,
Yep.
in terms of the physical technology. But at the same time, with there's so much content being produced out there, the amount of energy you need to potentially break through is that much higher. And so, I mean, particularly, so I'll leave all kind of the technical side aside. Really, what I want to see more in filmmaking, um, is both in documentary work and also in kind of fiction and fantasy work, is realistic depictions of what a climate change world looks like. And that includes both the language that we use, whether that's like, not dystopian, but just, talking about like, oh, it's a record hot summer. Have that be playing on the TV in the background.
Right.
Just bringing climate language into our everyday work, in terms of our films, and also utilizing a lot of stories that already exist rather than trying to hunt for a very specific story, look to the stories that exist already, looking at specifically, from a climate change standpoint, look at our environmental justice initiatives around the country, that those are stories ready to be told right now,
Yeah.
and need telling. And I look to a lot of this and learn a lot of this through the Hollywood Climate Summit, which is a conference that happens out in California every June in LA. That gets to a lot of this, that we just need to have climate language be a more prevalent part of our everyday filmmaking careers.
Yeah, no, good. Thank you for that. That was fantastic. So, thank you so much for your time today. Anybody who wants more information on Will, you can go to his website, willthefourth.com, and the fourth is all spelled out. One, yeah, 3 words, no spaces. He has a blog, he has science cafes in North Carolina there, all kinds of things to go check out. And we'll put the information in the comments. So thank you so much for being here and sharing some time with me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Feel free to nominate yourself or someone you know as our next guest. Thank you for being a part of our creative community. Stay inspired and keep shining bright.